Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Tolkien Experience Podcast. That's right, this isn't a normal episode. Instead, it's a bonus episode because, as you may have heard in our season finale, the Tolkien Society very graciously asked us to come and host a session at their annual Oxenmoot event earlier this year. I've been working with the Tolkien Society and specifically the organizers of Oxenmoot to get the audio from that session that I can now provide as a special holiday bonus episode for us. So I want to thank the organizers of Oxenmoot for working with me. I also want to thank the Tolkien Society so much for allowing us to be part of their event. And as always, I want to thank you, our listeners, for providing us a place to discuss Tolkien, and also a special shout out to our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/Tolkien Experience for funding all of this and making it possible. So without any more delay, here is our session from Oxenmoot. Hi there, everyone. So the three panelists that you see here, myself, Sara Brown, and Sara Westvick, we are the co-hosts of the Tolkien Experience Podcast. We were very honored to be nominated for and then eventually win the award for Best Online Content for the Tolkien Society in the most recent round of awards. Thank you guys so much for voting for us. It's truly a humbling experience. And then to be invited to participate at Oxenmoot, an event that is very dear to all three of us in different ways. We wanted to start off by giving you a little bit of background about the podcast for those of you who may not know about the podcast at all. I know it's a very niche thing, a podcast. And so I know that several of you might not even know that our podcast is out there, much less have listened to an episode. And so we'll each kind of give our own introduction, and then we thought it'd be nice to catch up with a couple of our past guests in the session today, and then have some time for question and answer at the end of the session. So for me personally, I actually started the Tolkien Experience Podcast because my interests in Tolkien are in reception, the way that people kind of ingest Tolkien's work and what it means to them personally. And I was in the midst of studying that for my PhD, and I started to realize that the way that my PhD was structured, there were a lot of people and a lot of experiences that I was leaving out, and I didn't want to do that. So I started this thing called the Tolkien Experience Project, and that's kind of a text-based thing where people kind of send in their answers, and it posts every Tuesday, and that's open to anyone. Anyone can participate in that. But after that went for a couple of years, people started approaching me and asking, what are you going to do with this? Is this going to be research? Is this going to be something else? And then other people were approaching me and saying, you should really put this in other formats other than just text-based. Like, I'd love an audio format. I'd love a podcast, things like that. And so I reached out to some people that I had met at Tolkien 2019 and at a Signum University event prior to that, the Prancing Pony Podcast guys, Sean and Alan. And they very graciously shared a lot of their experiences and insights with me in terms of setting up a podcast and what it costs and how to do it well, those kinds of things. And really from their guidance, realized that this was something that was possible. And so then I reached out to Sara Brown to help me with that because Sara is a good friend that I know from for years now, and I thought she would be an excellent addition. And so far, that's proven very accurate. And so, so we basically the premise of the podcast is we try our best to reach out to as many different groups, sectors, fandoms, fan communities as possible about Tolkien. So we've interviewed Sean Gunner of the Tolkien Society. We've interviewed Corey Olson of Signum University. We've interviewed Quickbeam or Clifford Broadway from TheOneRing.net, who does those weekly podcasts. We've also interviewed Mina Lukic, who you'll see on the call later. We've interviewed Christine Larson, who you'll see, and we've interviewed Andrew Higgins, who you'll see. So we have a lot of different areas that we're reaching into because the podcast, first and foremost, is a celebration of the diversity in the different ways that people can respond to Tolkien's work and what his text has inspired people to do. And so our podcast is really a celebration of people's personal experiences with Tolkien. So that's why I call it the Tolkien Experience, because we are interested in their experiences and how it's kind of coming out in their daily lives. I'll give you a couple of unique examples that might be new to several people here. The first one was a TikToker named New Betta Do Betta, and he has thousands of followers on TikTok. And what he loves to do more than anything else is he has bits of the Silmarillion where he'll pick a character and he'll create a 30-second crash course on that character, just explaining who that character is, where they overlap other major events. Just phenomenally full of energy and excitement, very approachable to anyone who doesn't know Tolkien. His whole point is to be kind of a first contact for people who want to know more about Tolkien. So that was a person recommended to me by one of our listeners because I didn't even know because I'm not on TikTok. And another one that I really loved was Margaret. I'm blanking on her last name. She's the creator of Feminazgul, a metal band. And she had a fantastically unique and interesting first experience with The Lord of the Rings where they were staking out around trees to keep them from being logged, to keep them from being cut down. And that's the context in which she read The Lord of the Rings. So we talked about, as you can imagine, how the kind of natural images and the kind of environmental message of The Lord of the Rings really resonated with her much more so than perhaps someone who wasn't in that context at the time. So really trying to find different voices. Margaret Killjoy, yes, thank you so much for the reminder. These unique people and unique experiences that are bridging all of the different kind of communities that we've set up as Tolkien fans. Because one of the things that I want to do is help foster an appreciation of different communities among fans that aren't in that community necessarily. So like perhaps people on the OneRing.net don't typically go over to Signum University, and the Signum University people don't typically go over to the Tolkien Society or vice versa. I do realize that there is a lot of actual overlap in those. But institutionally, those feel like very different things. And so the podcast is an effort to kind of blur the lines of all these things and celebrate how we are just a really big Tolkien fan community when you think about it. And beyond that, also blur the lines between kind of scholarship and fandom, because there are a lot of scholars who are fans, and there are a lot of fans who do really good research and scholarship. And so also blurring the lines between community organizers and scholars and things like that to develop a really well-rounded appreciation of a lot of people's different approaches. So that's kind of my story with starting it up. And I think I've probably bogarted enough time. So I'll hand it off to Sara Brown to share her experience with starting the podcast.
Hey, so as Luke says, this was his baby to start off with. Sorry to use the word baby in terms of Luke, because I know that Luke's getting very little sleep because of his actual baby. But the first I really knew about this was the Tolkien Experience Project. And I'd followed what Luke had been doing with the Tolkien Experience Project for quite some time, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant idea. Just asking people, okay, what is it about Tolkien that you love? What is it that you felt drawn to about Tolkien's work and that sort of thing? So when Luke approached me at Tolkien 2019 in Birmingham, and said, hey, I'm thinking of starting this podcast. Do you fancy doing it with me? Frankly, I couldn't say yes, please, and thank you quickly enough, because I thought that sounds awesome, because it's the opportunity to talk to people about Tolkien in a really informal way. And some people, as Luke says, some people are academics, some people aren't necessarily academics, some people blur the lines between the two. And in my real life TM, I often don't have the opportunity to just sit and chat about Tolkien with folks. I'm married to a wonderful man who's never read Tolkien and has no interest in it and no intention whatsoever of ever reading it. Okay, we're still married though, despite all of that. But that means that I don't just sit with people and chat. Now, I do work for Signum University and I teach Tolkien there, but that's different. It's totally different teaching it and interacting with students to just having the opportunity to talk to people. So, yeah, it all started off at Tolkien 2019. And Luke said, I've got this idea for this podcast. Let's see how this goes. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, a lot of the organization is down to Luke. He says, okay, so let's organize this and here's this person and let's organize you to interview them. And I just go, okay, I'll do that. So I get the really easy end of the job, to be honest. I get pointed in the direction of somebody lovely and I get to interview them and talk to them. And we have a set list of questions that we will always sort of work around those questions. But what I love is when we get to riff off those questions. And one question will take us down a path in which we talk for ages about something. And it's just delightful to delve into somebody's experience of Tolkien. And some of the people that I've interviewed, I know these people really well. You know, I've known them for years. Hi, Christine Larson, and obviously Anna Small, who's coming up soon. Hers is going to be broadcast soon. People like that, Chris Vaccaro. I've known these people for a long time, Andy Higgins, but I didn't know their origin story. You know, I've never really said, okay, well, what is it about Tolkien that drew you in the first place? So that was lovely. So I got to know these people on a totally different level. And then there are some people that I didn't know them at all. And I got to talk with them and find out lots about them that I thought was just really great. And it feels like a community when we do this. Because you suddenly realize just how many people have come to Tolkien in so many different ways. And we're all like this massive, wonderful group. Not everybody the same, but everybody connected through this one thing that we all love. So that's me. Thanks, Luke. And thanks, Luke.
So I guess that's me then. Luke and Sara, I mean, you guys were here from the beginning. You are the OG Tolkien Experience Podcast hosts. I was very grateful when Luke asked me to join. I'm the newest host, still very green. I just started this year. But I've been familiar with Luke's work on the Tolkien Experience project prior. And I really liked it. I loved the entire concept behind his PhD. I like that, it was branching out to, engage with more people. His suggestion to me or rather his offer to join the podcast came at a time when myself and a few other people in the Tolkien community were, sort of advancing our own initiatives to try and broaden the kinds of perspectives that you have in both Tolkien academia as well as Tolkien fandom, and trying to, one thing, you bridge those divides, and another thing to bring new perspectives into both of those fields, especially underrepresented perspectives or perspectives that have historically been either silenced or downplayed. So, Luke contacted me at the start of the year and I jumped onto the podcast, and it has been such a wonderful experience. As Sara was singing Luke's praises, and I will also sing them because he's definitely been a rock in this entire community effort to create this sense of, community, to use the word that Sara was using, for bridging the divide between fans and scholars and fan scholars. And it's wonderful because it really gives a platform to a much broader audience of people. And sometimes they're people we know, sometimes they're people we don't know. I'm pretty new to the entire field of Tolkien scholarship, and a lot of the people that I'm friends with are people who are maybe just getting started in the Tolkien community. So they're not necessarily people that are very well known. And it's very cool to be able to, to get to know them a bit better in this setting where other people can also get to know them, and to, raise that platform for them as well. Just off the top of my head, one of my favorite interviews that I've done so far, I've only done, I think, 3, but one of my favorites that I've done was with Putri Priyatini from Indonesia, who reads Tolkien's texts through a lens of Javanese mythology. It was such a unique approach. It was something I was really interested in because I'm originally from Southeast Asia, and I was really excited that she could, share this on the podcast and, have this platform to share her really interesting and unique perspectives with the broader Tolkien community, and basically, demonstrate that there's so many different ways that we can engage with the text as fans, as scholars. And I mean, for me, that's the greatest benefit of this podcast and everything that it offers. And I'm really happy that I get to now be a host on it, and bring more of these voices into the picture from all across the spectrum. I've so far it's been with Putri. I've interviewed an art scholar, Joel Mariner, which his work on Eastern Bloc interpretations of Tolkien has been so fascinating, so unique, something I had not heard of before, as well as getting to interview Jenny Dolphin. I'd love to interview more artists, because it's a whole other aspect of visualizing Tolkien, which there's the established ways, I suppose, is how you can say it, of visually interpreting the text, and then there's lots of different ways of interpreting the text visually or in other formats, music, for example. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this podcast, is it both platforms these broad perspectives that we have, but it also, as Sara said, lets you know a little bit about the backstories of these people, which really gives so much depth and heft to what they're doing. Because, we're in this fandom because we love this one beautiful universe, but we're also bringing all of our individual interpretations and our life experiences and the way that we interact with the world and share our creative drive and spirit with everybody. So that's why I love those 5 interview questions that we're always able to riff off of in the interview, because we can really bring in some wonderful discussions about everybody's backgrounds. So yeah, that's me. That's why I definitely said yes straight away the moment Luke asked me, because I love everything that this podcast is doing, and I'm really glad to be on it.
I was really interested. You just said you had a favorite there, Sara, and it's hard to pick out a favorite because everybody is just so different and so wonderful. Luke, do you have a favorite looking back?
Oh, goodness. It's really hard. I think so. The season 1 finale, Sara and I sat down and tried to pick out some favorites from season 1. So I'll try to pick out from season 2 instead. I really think your interview with Verlin Flieger was fantastic. Not just because Verlin is an amazing person, and I enjoyed getting to know more about her, but also Verlin's a trickster, and she started asking you questions, and so we got to know more about you as well. So it ended up being kind of a half and half. It was a 2-person interview, and I thought that was really fun.
It was fun, and yes, Verlin as a trickster, I think that's an excellent description, actually, because that's exactly what she is. I kind of say, okay, Verlin, I've got all these lovely questions. Let's have a chat. And then she turns it around on me. Oh, okay. So at the end of that, I think I had agreed to write papers and publish a book. And I don't know how she does this. How does she do that? I went into this thinking, I get to talk to Verlin Flieger. This is wonderful. And she even remembered who I was. And I've only met her a few times. And it's just, and fangirl flailing and all of the above. And then I come out of it thinking, did I just agree to write a book? How did she get me to do that? Honestly, she is something else. She is amazing and wonderful. And it was such a privilege So if I'm allowed a sneaky favorite, it might be that. Although I do have a real love for Christine Larson's chat that we had when we had Elrond sitting in the back with a feather boa on. I think that was a favorite moment, because Elrond with a feather boa is a thing that should just be. So,
and just to kind of get a plug in there, I suppose, we do release the podcast for free to all of the big podcast services, but we do have a Patreon, and if you're a member of the Patreon, you actually get video of each of the interviews. And so that's, if you want to see Elrond's feather boa in the middle of that interview, you can do that through the Patreon. So the next thing we wanted to do was bring back some of our guests to basically kind of give an update on what they've been doing since their interview with us. And I believe Andrew Higgins has been able to join us. So if we could make him. See if I can find it.
I think I just promoted him as A. Higgins. I think I just promoted him to panelist for you.
Okay.
Right. Are we there?
I see him.
Hi.
There we are.
Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi. I'm actually, this is quite funny. So I'm in my dorm room at St. Anne's College for Oxenmoot. I had to run back to my dorm room and log on to my iPad for this. So I'm praying it's not going to run out of battery because I've been in sessions all day. But brilliant to be here. Great to see you, Lou. Great to see you, Sara, and everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Right. Sorry, a bit of a pause there. So I was just in Middle Earth just a minute. So watching Alan Sisto holding his own with the English on a very quintessential English game show, which went very well.
Absolutely. Luke, who are we going to have chatting with Andy?
You.
Me? Oh, such a privilege. Andrew Higgins.
Yes, darling Sara, fellow sodomite.
That needs an explanation.
Yeah, that definitely needs an explanation.
Everybody, when Andrew actually describes me as a sodomite, can I just say that Sodom actually stands for Society for the Obtaining and Drinking of Mead? Okay, nothing else in this particular context, can I just say? I thought we'd better just,
non-alcoholic mead, exactly.
Yes, Andy on the non-alcoholic mead, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so it's been a little while since we had the discussion with you.
Yeah.
And I know that you've been sneakily busy on various Tolkien things, right? Yeah. So what's been going on for you? Well, what can we look forward to?
What can you look forward to? Well, during lockdown, I've been engaged in some really interesting projects, one of which I will be unveiling tomorrow in a paper about the King's Letter. I've taken a really deep dive into the letter that that Aragorn, King Elessar, wrote to Sam. And there's different versions of it, and it's written both in English and in Sindarin. And so I've been looking at that and kind of building upon some of the work that Carl Hochstetter and Arden Smith did in Vinya Tangwar. So that's going to be, the first bits of that are going to be revealed tomorrow. There's a lot more work there, and I want to kind of work that up into a big article and everything. So I've been working on that. Been working on some more of the language stuff in terms of the different layers of Tolkien's language invention. Kind of like what Carl talked about last night about looking at different historic periods in the development of the Elvish language. So had a lot of time on my hands. Well, actually, I basically started a new job when I was in lockdown as Director of Development at Imperial War Museum. So when I wasn't doing that, I was going through lots of Vineyard Tangwars and Parma Eldalambarons and doing some work on that. And then I've got two projects coming up which actually aren't necessarily Tolkien related, but they are language invented related. And they're about two other incredible story worlds. one which is the Star Wars story world, and the other one is the Star Trek story world. So I'm going to be looking at the languages of Star Wars and Star Trek. Those are two really exciting projects. So yeah, I've been working on that. And a couple of other, what I'm really trying to do now is assess the progression of the Elvish languages in the 1920s and 30s, where we have a lot of the material now, thanks to the great work of Carl and the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship, and really starting to dig into that and contextualize it with the mythology at that time, basically. So I've been doing a lot of work on that, basically.
Mm-hmm. So are we getting a book on the languages of Star Wars and Star Trek?
We're going to get some chapters on that, definitely, for some books that are coming out, which is very, very exciting. So I'll be working on that. And then I'm also, another side project, there's this really interesting American science fiction show from the 80s and 90s called V, which were about these seemingly humanoids that invade the earth, and they turn out to be reptiles, and they eat rats and things like that. And I'm looking at that as another world building project. So I really interested, and it all came out of my work with Tolkien and what I did in my thesis and things like that, which is how do you build these worlds? You know, it's kind of the stuff that Mark J.P. Wolf has said a lot of interesting kind of studies on. And so I'm kind of building on that and everything. So I'm looking at that. And then my battery is getting really low. I'm really sorry. I have to talk really quickly. And then Carl's book, I'm just starting to read, and there's some really interesting things in there about the Elvish language. It's kind of setting my antenna going, so we'll see where that goes as well. So there's a lot of work ahead because we've got a lot of those parmas that have come out, but they haven't really been analyzed and contextualized with the mythology and the world building. So I'm doing a lot of work on that.
Okay, so if there was a dream project, what would it be?
The dream project would be to do the new version of Jim Allen's Introduction to Elvish with all of the Elvish material we have in place in different historic periods, not conflating, not combining, but treating each period as its own sui generis period of language invention. So I don't want to create a coiny, version of Elvish or anything like that. I'm not David Sallow. I don't want to do that. But what I want to do is historically look at each of the different periods of Tolkien's language invention. That would be my dream project. And the work I'm doing now is kind of a workup to that, but we still have a lot to see in terms of the later material. There's Taliska coming up. There's a lot of material there, the language that Tolkien invented for men. That's based on Gothic partially. And then there's all the stuff he did when he turned Noldorn into Sindarin in the 50s. And so there's a lot, but that's all reliant on the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship, publishing more stuff, which Carl pledged last night that he was working on now that he's done with this book. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes from that. But I've got a lot of work to do in the 20s and 30s right now. So I've got enough to keep me busy for a while.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it, that's for sure. Not to mention the fact that you've got to organise everybody for Leeds Medieval Congress next year.
Absolutely. So we are going to be live in Leeds next July, and I need more abstracts. So if there's anyone out there who wants to submit an abstract for Leeds, you can go on my blog, Dr. Votan's Musings, and you can see the call for papers. But I'm submitting in a couple of weeks, so I need them to get in quickly. So if anyone wants to give a paper at Leeds, it's an amazing conference. Thanks to Dr. Dimitra Fimi, who started it and gave us a foothold in Leeds, where Tolkien taught as a reader in the 20s. We now have an incredible conference in the UK, and it's an amazing gathering of people, including Dr. Sara Brad.
Well, thank you both so much. I hate to step on toes, but
that's okay. I think Andy's technology is about to die on us anyway.
Andy, if at all possible, if turning off your camera helps you preserve battery life, if you could get over to your website and then come over and paste the link so people can see where to go to contribute to Leeds, that would be phenomenal.
I'll do that right now. Yep.
Great.
Brilliant. And thank you guys. Your podcast is amazing. I mean, the amount of scholarship you guys profile is just fantastic. So well done. Keep going. I listen to it every Saturday on Brighton Beach as I'm walking on the beach. So thank you.
Oh, to be able to walk along the beach every Saturday. Great. Thank you so much. So now we'll turn to Mina Lukic. I believe she is already a panelist. There she is.
From the ops room, if you can hear me. From the ops room in Oxford. Glad to be with you. Glad to see you all. It's been a while since we talked or seen each other in one of the events. And yeah, thank you for inviting me initially to participate in your podcast and inviting me again to do a recap on what's been going on in between. So yeah, I don't know if you want to ask me something or I just tell you.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, it's really good to see you, Mina. Hi.
Hi.
And we just love to have a little bit of an update on how things are going. Because I think when you were last on the podcast, you were telling us a little bit about your PhD work that was had a heritage focus, but you were also drawing in some other aspects of fan studies, right? So if you could give us an update on that would be amazing.
Right. So yeah, I finished most of the research for my PhD, and I'm trying to finish it this year, hopefully. For those who don't know, my PhD is about Tolkien reception and cultural memory, the ways of remembering Tolkien in our culture, different channels and modes of remembering him, including fandom. So yeah, that's one big chunk of my research. And in the meantime, what I've done in the last year and a half, besides trying to summarize and put those things together, I devoted a significant amount of time to researching places in terms of real places in the UK that people visit, which are related to Tolkien. I've done a survey related to that, and also had a talk at Tolkien seminar in February about Tolkien's grave and its reception of that place as a site of memory. And the other thing are places in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, more specifically built places, architecture, because I'm an art historian. So from my point of view, that's more interesting than landscape or natural formations. I'm trying to finish a paper about architecture of Middle Earth in the context of how they are used to shape the identities of cultures we are encountering, and how is that applied in the films as well. So sort of comparison between Tolkien's descriptions and drawings and the films. And part of it was also the talk I've had this morning about dark places on Middle Earth. So yeah, that's mostly what I've been doing, Tolkien related. In the meantime.
Really awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask about that talk with the dark places. It's been interesting to see this pivot towards places. Did that arise out of the work that you were doing with the PhD and looking at, for example, sites of memory, and then that sort of, was it an inspiration?
Yes, because for my PhD, one part of, one mode of remembering Tolkien is how the artists reinterpret his works and how they visualize his fictional world, obviously, because that's an important part of spreading and remembering any content further, further artistic interpretation. And starting from that, I went to how Alan Lee and John Howe depicted most of those locations. So that is a part of my PhD research, but then went also further to other topics which won't be necessarily part of it. I was focused initially on positive light, places of light. So those places we encounter as good. And then I decided that I should cover the dark places as well at some point, just for the sake of having a complete insight. So that's how the dark places talk came to be. This paper on the places, positive places, I'm doing a revised version, trying to finish a revised version for Cami Higgins' upcoming book on strongholds and habitations on Middle Earth. So that's going to be part of it. Dark places are probably going to be something else, like part of something different, different publication. But yeah, that's currently what I'm working on.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you got to be able to present some of it at Oxenmoot. I think it looks really promising, your work into places. I really look forward to reading the stuff about light places as well, as a nice contrast to that. So maybe Mina, if you're able to drop in the chat where we can keep up with your work, and also about that monograph that your piece is.
Oh, Kami is all right. Okay.
Yeah. So anybody who's interested can go take a look. Would be awesome. Thanks.
All right. Deal.
Yep, fabulous. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thanks again, Mina. And so lastly, we thought we would have Christine Larson join us, who should be in the attendees list. Or Chris Larson, as she's listed there.
I'm not seeing her right now.
It's Chris with a K, K-R-I-S. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I see.
She is here. I see her in the chat.
I think Chris should be a panelist now.
Looks like we're getting her to join.
I'm here, and so's Elrond.
Hooray! So of our three guests, you're the most recent that we've had on the podcast. So I realize you might not have as much new stuff, but then again, you are a very busy scholar, so you might have plenty of new things for us. So what have you been working on lately?
Well, let's see. I posted a very lengthy review of the book, The Science of Middle-earth, on the Journal of Tolkien Research that got a little bit of buzz. And I've been being a good girl, and I'm trying to get all of my orphaned conference papers on Tolkien that I haven't published and writing those up and sending those out for publication. And I have a bunch that I've put on the Journal of Tolkien Research. No, this is not a commercial for the Journal of Tolkien Research, but it could be. I have a paper tomorrow on Tar Meneldor and the Royal Sarantal Observatory. I've always known that there was this one astronomer in Numenor, and I thought I'd sort of delve into that. But the more I looked into it, the more I found that there were other observatories throughout Middle-earth. So you'll hopefully be learning a little bit about those tomorrow. And the larger article of that should hopefully appear in the next issue of Lembas Extra. So that's... And I've already written that paper, so it's definitely off my plate. I've also been working on the pandemic and representations of pandemics in popular culture. And I found some really spooky synergies between Babylon 5, The Witcher, and Tolkien. And I never paid much attention to the pandemics in Middle-earth until now. And so there's some pretty interesting stuff. And I'm presenting that at the Northeast Pop Culture Association in October. And I've submitted an abstract for an article, and hopefully it'll be accepted. And I think since I've talked to you, Sara, I don't remember. I got back the reviewers on my book manuscript on science and technology and Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher series, and the reviewers gave it a thumbs up. So McFarland Publishing has given it the thumbs up. The only thing is I just have to wait for season 2 to drop on Netflix so that I can update the manuscript and send it in. So it won't be actually appearing in print until next year. So those are some of the things I've been doing.
Wow. So yes, as we knew, you are a very busy scholar. So we can look forward to book on Witcher series next year, paper on different observatories around Middle Earth, which sounds fascinating. And I'm really interested to see what you dig up about pandemics in Middle Earth and Babylon 5 and the Witcher series. Can you give us a little sneak peek about that pandemic work at all?
Well, the fact that it's airborne is easy. The fact that it can cross species is interesting. And the fact that Tolkien knew about social distancing and pandemics. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So are you, I'm just, you're making my brain kick into overdrive. And so I'm my ADHD, which I have, is kicking in, and I'm going, okay, the flu epidemic in 1918, where was Tolkien? Like, where was that in his imagination? Like, do you think he knew about that, or is that something you're looking into?
Well, he obviously would have known about it. I mean, it was everywhere. I haven't seen any direct mentions. I mean, I don't see anything in the letters reference to it directly. I don't know of any evidence that he caught the 1918 flu, but obviously it would have been on his radar. I mean, around the same time he was dealing with this trench fever. So he had his own sort of pandemic. And thinking about long COVID, he had long trench fever, essentially, right? So he could, he could definitely empathize with these people who just can't get better, can't kick this disease out of their system. So it's a lot of really spooky sort of parallels and echoes.
Wow, yeah, that sounds fascinating. I can't wait to hear what you make of it. And in addition to what you've already talked about, I think you've also presented at a couple conferences since then. I do remember one piece on the Milky Way being really, really interesting about, well, if you want to summarize that presentation, I think it'd be interesting as well.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think of how far back this was. That was one of the conferences. That piece will be appearing in Malorn, I'm led to believe, this year. And it's a piece on, Tolkien doesn't really talk about the Milky Way very much in his writings, which is weird because of all the astronomy. And so I found some what I believe are subtle references to it in various places. There is definitely one very explicit sort of mentioning of it, and that is in Watling Street, in his essay on W, philology of the letter W, and Watling Street. And he makes up this little myth about where that might come from. And so I was trying to see if that got incorporated into the legendarium in very oblique ways. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So yes, it's scheduled to be a note in the forthcoming Malorn in the final processes of joining that issue. So thank you so much for joining us today and giving us an update on everything you're working on. It sounds phenomenal. All right. So I did want to make sure that we had just a few minutes here at the end to answer questions that anyone had. I had not asked our guests to stay on, so if you have questions for them, if you might want to drop them on the chat, or there are other means like through Sketch, the website, something like that, of reaching out to them. But if you have any questions for the hosts about the podcast, about guests that we've had, anything like that, we'd be more than happy to answer them. You can just drop those in the Q&A box for us.
Yeah, but I've been looking so far, Luke, and right now we just have one question, and it just popped up right now. And the question is, how do you find people to bring to the podcast?
Oh, that's a good question, because we're looking for people from different walks of life, right? And so part of it is, in starting my own PhD and things like that, I had to go and do a literature review. And so one of the easy starting places is, who were the scholars that I had to cover my literature review? That's an easy place to start in terms of scholarship. But then branching out into other fields is a little more difficult because, I'm one person. And so my experience with the fandom is completely skewed by my own experience of the fandom. And so those were some of the main reasons why I wanted to bring in Sara and Sara, because I'm in the US, Sara's in the UK, Sara has been many different countries. And so they have different experiences and know different people and have different connections than I do. And so reaching out to someone like a Yini Dolphin, for instance, that's not just in my experience. I would be more inclined to reach out to like a Ted Naismith because he's Canadian, whereas Yini Dolphin's German. And so I think the hosts complement each other in that way, in that we each have kind of our own angle. But also we listen to a lot of people. We get a lot of recommendations from our listeners, from our patrons, who say, oh, did you know about this person? Did you know about that person? They're amazing. They're fantastic. And suggestions of listeners is something that we definitely listen to, because even though we are three different people with three different experiences, there are a lot of other experiences out there that we want to make sure that we try to include. So yeah, we any source available is where we find our guests.
Another thing is that as well, whenever we attend these conferences and like go to talks and papers, it's also, noting down like interesting speakers, like especially at the diversity seminar that we had earlier this year. I noted down so many people who I wanted to, contact later on for the podcast. So, as Luke said, all the different sources, and just anytime anybody has anything interesting to say, it's just a matter of reaching out to them, because, as Jennifer just put in the chat, Tolkien nerds everywhere. It's true. They are everywhere. You just have to keep your ear to the ground and you hear about the coolest people.
And we're always open to suggestions. So if there's somebody that anybody thinks, actually, I'd really like to hear them talk, then get in touch. You can find us all on Twitter, by the way, and you can find the Tolkien Experience Twitter there as well. Just get in touch and let us know if there's somebody that you'd really love to hear. Isn't that right, Luke?
Absolutely. So like I said earlier in the presentation, Knew Better, Do Better, the TikToker, was a recommendation from one of our listeners. And he's easily one of my favorite interviews, just because his energy is captivating when you start talking to him. Marilyn was asking in the chat if there's a list of people that we've interviewed. Marilyn, I posted a link to the homepage of the podcast, and all of the podcast episodes are listed at the bottom of that page. And each episode is just like episode 1, Dimitri Fimi, episode 2. And so the name of the person for that episode is in the title. So that's probably the easiest way to find it. And I can actually repaste that to make it easier.
It looks like Sara may have already pasted that as well.
I've got our Twitter in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, got it, Luke. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So there are no other open questions in the Q&A. So please, as you have questions, please do type them in the Q&A or in the chat. So we have about 10 minutes left. My question is, how did each of you get into Tolkien? What brought you, what was your Tolkien experience, I guess?
You first, Luke?
Fine. So I don't remember. I was too young. My first Tolkien memory is sitting in an elementary school classroom. I think it was in 4th grade. So for people, I'm trying to convert that for people who don't know American education. I think that's 9 years old, something like that. And my school had a storyteller who came every week, I think, and recited a chapter of The Hobbit in installments from memory. And my memory is sitting there listening to him and waiting for him to mess up. So I know I had to have heard the story before he came. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that he messed up. But that's my earliest memory, because I was that petulant child. So then I went on to read Lord of the Rings when I was like 11, which was a few years before the Jackson adaptation came out. Tried to go straight into the Silmarillion and failed because I just didn't have the capacity when I was 12 or 13 to do that. but by the end of my teenage years, I had read that, and I had reread The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and so yeah, since then pretty much. So I started young and built over time.
Shall I go next?
That'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I was always a voracious reader from a very young age. And my dad, who died just over 10 years ago now, he was also a voracious reader. And he had a great bookshelf with loads and loads of really interesting looking books on it. But one day he handed me this great big chunky tome. And he said, give this one a go. And it was The Lord of the Rings. And I was 8. And I read that. It took me quite some time, and I absolutely loved it. So I read The Lord of the Rings before I read The Hobbit. So I went to the local library and thought there must be something else here by this Tolkien fella. And they had The Hobbit, and I read it. And for some reason, I was really kind of confused because I was expecting, I don't know why, Frodo to be the Hobbit in The Hobbit. And I don't know why I expected that given the ending of The Lord of the Rings, but I knew that The Hobbit came before, and I have no idea. But anyway, 8 years old, I read The Lord of the Rings first, then I went and read The Hobbit. Then I got confused, so I went back and read The Lord of the Rings again after I read The Hobbit. And then I tried the Silmarillion. And just bear in mind, I can't have been more than about 9 at that point. Well, like Luke, I failed miserably at the Silmarillion. And I didn't return to that until probably my mid-teens, even my late teens at that point. But I kept kind of picking that great big paperback with the yellow cover and picking it up and reading it again. And I just kept rereading it. And then for years, I didn't read The Lord of the Rings or any Tolkien at all. So all the way through my university years, there's this great big gap where I didn't read it at all. And then for some reason, I had visited my parents, and there it was still on the shelf, and I grabbed it. And I read it again, and I just realized how much there was still to this book. And I kept going back to it every now and then. And then eventually I got to a grand old age, and this is post degrees, and I was a teacher and everything. And I got this maggot in my brain that I wanted to do a PhD, and I wanted to do that PhD on Tolkien. And that from that point on, it just became a complete fixture for me. I was going to do this, and it was incredibly painful and difficult, and it took me a very long time. And it was after I finished my PhD, it was a year before I picked that book up again, because I just couldn't stand looking at it for about 12 months. And then I regained my love for it. So it's been a bit of a kind of roller coaster ride. But I'm now fully immersed back into Tolkien anyway, because I teach Tolkien classes regularly at Signum. I'm trying to do as many conferences now as I can, because I really just want to explore my own thoughts about Tolkien as much as possible. And so that's my origin story, if you like. Sarah, your turn.
Okie dokie. That was a terrific story, though, Sara. so many permutations and perambulations on the journey in being a Tolkien fan. In my case, well, so the person who is behind all of this is my mother. She's the one who got me into Tolkien, because she had read the book a long time ago, in the 80s, I think it was. And the thing is, I'm a late 90s kid. So by the time I was a cognizant human who could remember stuff, the films had already been released. And so at the age of, I think 6, she had already given me a copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I liked it. So she was like, oh, this child likes fantasy. The Lord of the Rings films have all just been released. I know, I'll buy a CD of Fellowship of the Ring and play it for this little child. So she put it on, and I started watching it with my sister, and I was just completely sucked into it. the thing is that it immediately evoked these emotions in me that I didn't really know how to name exactly what they were. And I was like sucked into that universe. And especially it was the music that did it for me, because I'm a musician. And like that's a language that really just speaks to me. And I mean, Howard Shore's score is a complete masterpiece. It's a masterclass in score. It's a masterclass in operatic scoring. It's absolutely incredible. And from there, I was just obsessed. So I was like, Ma, like, can we get the next movie? And then what happens after? And she's like, oh, do you know there were books? And I was like, books? So she got me a copy of The Hobbit, which I still have, my old battered copy of The Hobbit. And I started reading that, and it was just amazing. I read The Hobbit, and then the next year I started reading Lord of the Rings. I was only 7, so it took me about 2 years to read it. But it was good fun. And it definitely, I did enjoy reading it at such a young age, because I obviously didn't absorb as much of the detail as I would have reading it older. But for me, it had a greater sense of the fantastical about it, because I was still in that childhood stage where everything is just, it's just, new, and all of the possibilities are out there, and, there's this entire world to explore. So it was very fun to read it at such a young age. Of course, then when I was 9 years old, my mom gave me a copy of the Silmarillion, and I opened the first page and I was like, what is going on? Slightly unsure what's happening here. So I put that one off until I was, I think, I started rereading it properly when I was about 16, because that was when I had begun to get a little bit more involved in Tolkien fandom. Previously, my main engagement was with music. I am originally from Singapore, and they used to bring the productions in, playing the music from the films. So that was the main way I had previously engaged in it, like the symphony, for example, live shows, which was, I mean, I can't even describe what an experience those were. It was just life-changing. But then I started to get involved in fandom when I was older, and that was also life-changing. It was completely transformative to meet lots of other people, because in my real life circle, really the only person who understood the depths of what I was into was like my mom and my very small circle of friends. But then getting to branch out into online fandom and meet people, and then eventually when I moved overseas, and then I started to get involved with the TS, it just completely expanded the horizons of being involved in Tolkien fandom, and enjoying his works and enjoying all these stories, and they've taken on so many new dimensions. So yeah, that's my origin story.
Sorry, Luke, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that there are two other kind of frequently asked questions that I get pretty often that I can go ahead and answer. The first is, this sounds a lot like the fandom oral history project from Marquette University. Is it the same thing? And no, it's not. Bill Fliss and I actually started our projects at around the same time. And really before either of us started publicizing them, both of us went to a conference in Kalamazoo and kind of compared notes there. And so we are very familiar with each other's projects. He's been a guest on our podcast, so we are aware of it, but it's a kind of a different thing that we're doing. And then the other thing is that one of the things that we really celebrate is everyone's experience. And part of that is not valuing one part of someone's experience over another. So if someone loves The Hobbit more than the Silmarillion, that doesn't make them less of a Tolkien fan. They just like a different story than other people. If someone loves The Lord of the Rings more than The Hobbit, that doesn't make them a less Tolkien fan. So if someone loves the films and that was their gateway into Tolkien, we celebrate that as well, because we're just happy you're here in the community with us having the conversations. So that's one of the key things that we celebrate on the podcast is everyone's experience is different and unique, and they're all wonderful. So if we can leave you with anything, that's what I hope we leave you with is the celebration of everyone's experience of Tolkien.